Okay, thank you. We're here today on Thursday, August 16th, 2:30 for the ADP meeting. We're here to welcome you to the Squamish Nation Traditional Territory. And next on the agenda is to adopt the agenda. We have a motion to adopt the agenda. Seconded. John. Great. Okay. First on the minutes is to ADP meeting minutes. Has everyone looked at that? Everyone happy with that? Okay. Motion to adopt those minutes. John. Seconded. Shan. Okay. All good. So the first up on the menu here is 39359 Queensway, DP 479. And Carrie, you're here to present.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So Carrie Hamilton, planner of the district, and the project lead for 39359 Queensway, DP 479. The application is proposing a 2-story light industrial building, and the development is proposing to offer 7 separate light industrial units, up to seven units, with roughly 2,370 square feet reserved for a fitness facility, all of which are allowable uses in the I-1 industrial zone. The application was received before the new OCP, so it will follow the older development permit areas, so that's DPA 6 and DPA 6A, which are for the Squamish Industrial Park and for the business park sub-area plan. So staff's review concluded that a number of the guidelines are being fully met and would appreciate ADP's specific comments and thoughts and recommendations on a few form and character items. These are related to building materials and color. DPA 6A states the building materials that do not convey a sense of quality or permanence, or which will not withstand extensive rain and wind, should be avoided. The intention of the guidelines are for the business park to become a high-quality business center, and that sites and buildings must be suitably designed and landscaped. So staff is just seeking ADP's design perspective to comment on the general materials selection and their conveyance to withstand the Squamish climate and meet the objectives of DPA 6A, which is a little bit higher quality, form, and character than the DPA 6. We also wanted to just highlight that the parking calculations were based off of the lower industrial parking, and that staff would just like to highlight that it may not comply should any kind of industrial service or more commercially oriented business that are allowed in the I-1 zoning. So it would be limited to potentially just this fitness facility and some really warehouse storage types of industrial with this calculation. And the highlights that there's potentially some to look at the retaining walls, because this site will be raising up and the adjacent 2 sites are not developed. We just wanted to get some comments and some feedback from you as for what that design could look like, potentially being a temporary design if there's developments that do come on the adjacent properties to the south and north. And that's it.
Okay. Thanks. And you're here to present.
I'm Brigitte Loranger. I'm the architect for this project, and you know this guy, Crosland, who's our landscape architect on the project, and I have with me Bill Treen, who's part of my team, architectural team, and Dave Robson, who's our client from Corona Excavations. So as Carrie noted, this is the site here. I don't know how well you can see that. The screen is not very good. Thank you. So in red here, it's on Queensway, on the west side of Queensway, just north of Commercial Street or place here. Yeah. Just for reference, this is the Walmart. This is the Home Depot here. So a closer look, here's our site. There's a vacant site adjacent to it, and there's a couple buildings here and some more industrial buildings on the other side. This is what it looks like from Queensway looking west. So some of the adjacent building, this is the building at the corner of Queensway and Commercial Place. And here's the front of it, here's the back of it, sort of your typical industrial building. This building fronts directly onto Queensway. The building that is north of that one is actually a series of two buildings that are these two long longitudinal. They have two short little facades on Queensway with parking in between. So again, different way to look at it. This is the parking in the middle, and this is where the building across the street that has High Country Brewing. Backcountry. Okay. And that's the rear of their building. I put this one in because this is one that I think that is more successful along with this one way. And why does that matter? Because we originally had a scheme that was one building with some parking at the front, some parking at the back. But the design guidelines for this area specify that the building should be towards the frontage, and the planning department did not support this because of the parking at the front. So we had to go to Plan B, which caused us a fair bit. And then, so we came back with this, which our site, unlike the one that is just further south that has two long buildings going east-west, this site is not as wide this way, and we didn't have the room to do that. So we kind of reinterpreted that by doing two buildings, one that is at the front and fronting directly on Queens Way, and a building at the back, and creating a sort of a parking courtyard in the middle. So this building has been designed to really face and address the street, which was something that was much desired. We've put a covered walkway along the front and the side, and then this walkway crosses the parking lot, and there's a walkway along the front of this building as well. So part of the challenge of this is to make these buildings attractive, but at the same time that they function really well in terms of their industrial use. So we have a parking stall that is in front of each sort of loading bay, so that you potentially could drive a vehicle in. Say you have a workshop that makes millwork, and you need to load up your millwork or unload your supplies, etc. So that's the whole idea of this. We have 7 units, 3 in the front building, 4 in the back building that are on 2 stories, with the second story with the potential of being like a full floor or a partial mezzanine. So we tried to make this, so here's the front of the building facing Queensway. And here's the south side of the building. So part of it is making challenging is to address the street, even though it's an industrial building. At the back of this building, it needs to be fairly functional, so you can have bay doors that open into your industrial unit. Side elevations. This is the rear building, and again, we have this covered canopy with these sort of bay doors that have more sort of glass. This is the rear of the back building, which opens onto some patios. So one of the things that our client my client was looking for was that there would be some outdoor space, both sort of a more public outdoor space at the front here, and then some more private outdoor space for employees. So we've got patios at the back, and I'm sure across, and we'll talk some more about that. One of the challenges is that The site is about a 5.3 meters at this end and 5.5 meter at the north end. And the flood control level is at 7 meters. So that means that we have to climb up about 5 to 6 feet from the sidewalk level to where the building is sitting. And so that poses some grade change challenges. So we've introduced some nice set of landings and stairs. The ramp to get up there is less than 5%, so the idea being more in the landscape. I'm sure Crosland will talk some more about that. We kept the driveway at the north side of the property. You can see that here because it's higher, and that means that we can climb up faster and be in the parking courtyard. In terms of materials, we're looking at sort of your fairly typical industrial materials with a precast panels. We're looking both at tilt-up construction or precast panels. We're still sort of debating about that, depending on cost and availability. A darker sort of color or base at the lower level and a lighter color at the upper level. That is fairly prevalent in the building across the street. This one's on the corner, darker base, lighter top. We're using some of this wood siding in a gray to do accents. And then the covered walkway has a series of brackets that are made out of glue lambs, both beams and the bracket, and then the soffit here would be wood, so it gives you a warmer sort of feeling at the more pedestrian level, and all the wood is fairly well protected and is not going to require a huge amount of maintenance. So I think that's it for now. Okay, how do I get to the landscape drawing?
Put it in a different file?
Yeah.
Okay. Escape for...
Escape. Okay. There we go.
Was it Control L? Do you want to switch or?
Yeah,
Sure.
I'll switch with you. I just switched them.
Good. Okay, thanks for giving the lights. So the landscape, obviously the first thing to address was the grading, and I'm glad Sarah showed up because I was thinking about Sarah the whole time when we were doing the ramping system for this, because I always feel it's important to include the ramp system for everybody's use. And so the idea here was that the ramp and the entry stairs were an integral part. We were constrained by distance, so we actually threw in that angle just to make something a little more interesting, and it gave us a little bit more run to pull off that ramp system, and we wanted to keep it below 5% or at 5 or less, so that we could avoid a rail system and make it much more. You good? Much more user friendly for all travelers. So as Brigitte mentioned, there's a kind of a casual or a more formal set of stairs and terraces up to the front of the building, plus that walkway that wraps all the way around. We've got patios at the back, and the grade of the paving and the walkways are all similar grade with slopes to drain, so there are no curbs as barriers for both loading and and travelers. Because the site has to be at 7 meters, as Carrie mentioned, there is some what might be considered temporary retaining until the neighbors come to that same level. So I think any retaining solution is temporary or will vanish as soon as the adjacent lots infill. So it shouldn't be a long-term issue, and I've even mentioned to Dave, maybe we can negotiate just a fill slope on the adjacent sites instead of building an expensive retaining system that may only last a year or two. So at the front, we've got some larger patio terrace areas. Some of it's covered, some of it's not. There's a built-in bench and planter across there, and bike storage in numerous spots around the building, and long-term lock-up bike storage at the back of what is the waste compound. Asphalt driveway, very rough concrete unit paver for the bulk of pedestrian zones, except for the ramps for more durability are poured in place concrete. There's a few retaining walls and a wall feature that comes out to the street that forms an opportunity for handrail and signage. So in the planting design, because it's an industrial area, I didn't want to kind of take a garden-esque approach to it. We'd have a very simple kind of landscape plan with big areas of single species across the front. So it's kind of a lot of grasses, a landscape that will do well in hot, arid times like this month. There's a mixture of deciduous and coniferous around the perimeter of the property. There is use of a number of native species that will thrive in either wet or dry conditions. Red osier dogwood, some snowberry, street tree that would be continuing with the red maples that are up and down the street to begin with. What else? The fencing that's around the site right now will be removed, so there's really no need for a perimeter fence at this point. And then at the back patio, more of a kind of patio size tree and some underplanting. So again, a space for employees to retreat to that are less public than say this front street patio or terrace that businesses could spill out on a bit too. Do we have on the south side of the building? We're trying a little bit of an experiment. For the south facade is a system of growing some hops. So we're looking at a ground anchor and a cable system that would go up to the underside of the soffit of the building, so that you'll get seasonal shading on that south side, maybe until a neighbor building moves in, depending on what configuration that site develops in. And so it's not a big investment or dependent on the hops growing long term, but there'd be seasonal shading, and we're going to put up the wires in a bit of a diagonal so that they will pass the windows and shade the solid parts of the building. The bike racks will be fairly simple 2-point contact. A lot of the ribbon racks that are used nowadays and specified are not great bike racks. Most cyclists want a 2-point contact just so your bike doesn't go sliding down the pipe when you're gone. Unit pavers, tumbled, rugged, solid paver that can take some industrial abuse and occasional snow removal scraping. And then very kind of hardy grasses and perennials and some shrubs, both coniferous and deciduous. That entry wall, maybe a fin wall that comes out with just a very simple address sign on it. And I believe I don't think we need to go back to any of the model images, so I think at that point, do you have anything more to add?
Nope.
No? Dave, anything to add?
Just one thing, I have been in touch with the owner to the south.
Hey Dave, can you come up to the front here? Your microphone will pick up when you're sitting here.
Here.
Yeah, thanks for having a look at this project for us. I have been in touch with the owner to the south, and he's not adverse to retaining sloping onto his property for the retaining that was in question earlier. But what we had actually planned on doing was having like a lock block retaining system on our property, of course, and later it could be abandoned when the next builders go ahead and do their project. So that was all I would be adding, was to the retaining question.
Okay, thanks. Okay, we'll do a round of questions and comments. Sarah, do you have any questions? You want to start the question?
No, not yet.
No, not yet. Okay. Yes.
No questions.
No questions.
With regards to lighting, is there lighting incorporated into the building for wayfinding?
There's going to be some lighting in the canopy, and there's going to be some wall lighting at the bay doors, at the back, at each one of the bay doors, and there would be some lighting at the back patio, just because that also serves as a secondary exit.
But not on the entry walkway?
We had indicated a wall light at the steps and some lighting on that address sign.
That's all.
The overhangs on the roofs, are they all the same? And do you know what dimension they are?
They are 3 feet generally, except on the south side where they are 2 feet because of the, or 2.5 feet because of the 0.76.
Right, gotcha. Getting close to the property now.
Yeah, the south portion of both buildings is right on the south setback, so according the overhangs can only be 0.76 into the setback.
All right. And then just on retaining the waste management building, would that have to be slightly different? To retain concrete down there because.
Yes, most likely we would do sort of just a concrete retaining wall that will get buried once the project to the north, because they're going to be in the same boat in terms of having to meet the 7-meter of flood elevation constraint.
Okay. And just a general question, maybe more for planning, but this is zoned for light industrial, so then the car parking count, like if things were to, is there a gym, is that right?
Yes.
So that's falling under more assembly occupancy. So
Yeah, so that's a fitness facility which is permitted under the zoning.
Okay.
There's not a lot, other than light industrial, so the light industrial, they're allowed to have a small retail component.
Right.
That is part of their business, so you're not allowed to have a full retail. So most of the businesses are going to be light industrial. We're thinking, well, Corona Excavation is planning to take part of this building over for their own premises.
Right.
There's landscape companies that are interested, so they're going to have tools, etc., supplies that would use this as a base. There is potential for a fitness facility which requires more than twice as much parking.
Yeah.
So that's why we're kind of limited, or then the other people would be, sort of kitchen cabinets, millwork kind of shop, outdoor sporting goods, manufacturing, that sort of thing.
Right.
That's what kind of businesses we see. But of course, until the project is further along, we don't know exactly who's going to be coming in. So.
Yeah, okay. And finally, I just wanted to know, was there ever an option to have the waste management building like closer to building 1, for example, or is it always sort of towards the back?
I think that towards the back is better. It's right next to the loading bay. It's just makes sense. We talked to Carney's about it, and they dictated the size of it,
Right.
and they were comfortable with that size, and then being able to bring in and out. So depending on who the tenants are, they might even have their own bins, depending on what kind of, do they have a lot of cardboard recycling, depending on the businesses,
Yep.
and that's part of the unknown,
Yep, okay, that's all for me. Thanks.
Dwayne?
Yeah, sorry.
Yes,
Thanks. Just one question, actually, so maybe just crossing the ramping and whatnot. The ramp is a dominant feature in the landscape and the front. Is there a rationale for the ramp other than accessibility? I know there's some grading opportunities here. Is it really just accessibility and you've chosen it to be a feature? Is that?
Yeah, I kind of get annoyed with their utilitarian ramp, so I thought it was the opportunity to be a bit sculptural about it and make that integrated its landings with the landings of the stairway. So is that answering your question? Or?
Yeah, no, just a curiosity, because I'm just looking at your grading. You're coming up at 6.8%. It's almost 5%. And your grading's a little bit flat, and you're almost arriving at the same spot. So the question is, could you avoid all of the ramp work and just come off with the...
No, we could barely get up. At a 5% ramp, barely get up to the 7 meters. So we had to get that much run.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so 6.8 if that were lowered to 5, and then you could come up and use the top side of the building. The grading at 6.16 meters to 6.85 meters would be less than 5%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm only just, no prejudice at all, but the ramp is obviously needed.
Yeah.
What's interesting about it is that if it's a feature and that's what you want, that's great. I'm just wondering if you actually need it or not. If you looked at the grading, that's just a comment.
But if you were to do that all the way back to here, you'd still have the issue of getting access to the front
It's already
Yeah.
there.
too.
Yeah. So you would
But
have
it
to go
would
to
be-
the back of the building to come back to the front, and we
Yeah.
didn't think that was very,
In order to get to here, I need a ramp to get there. So if the ramp was using the
Oh, yeah, sorry, now I'm following your
Just
direction. Okay.
It's just a...
No, we definitely wanted it to be up
No,
front
yeah, I
and
see what
as
you're
part of the
saying.
formal entry versus a side door kind
Yeah.
of entry. Yeah.
It's just a lot of work to do something that it may be an artful decision, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if the hops were to try and entice a brewery in there, or if they're just a reference to Squamish history. I think it's an interesting idea.
With backcountry across the street, it's kind of a fun idea. I mean, we've tried hops in a few other locations, and they're just a vigorous plant, and they can be stripped down at the end of the year, and so
Yeah, it's a
just
perfect
playing around with
seasonal
something. Yeah.
That's all my
I just want to understand fully, or if you can confirm for me. So your clear height inside the building is 13 feet in the first story?
it's 12.
12 feet. So it's not an industrial building. It's not an industrial bay.
Well, it
It's a
really
12.
depends what you are using it for. I mean, 12 feet, for some businesses, that's sufficient.
For very, very light industrial or for retail?
Well,
Or
it
office.
is light industrial. It's not meant to be heavy industrial because it's not even zoned for that.
Yeah, I don't know, I find that ceiling height problematic with the uses that are discussed, that you've discussed earlier. Anyway, questions. So this loading space here, if you were to bring a large truck in, has there been an analysis done on whether or not that turnaround works? So that a truck can actually drive in and
Well,
turn
again,
around and come out again?
it's the heaviest trucks are probably going to be Coronas, trucks.
For 100 years to come, or Corona may not be
No.
there in 20 years?
Well, again, it's light industrial, so it's not, it's not, you're not gonna run an that type of heavier use that would require much larger trucks out of it.
I'm
Because-
afraid I'd have to disagree with that, and what you will find is a large rig may want to come and visit this tenant here, and if they are encouraged to be backing in from the street, we really don't want that, so
Well, we had,
perhaps something could be looked at here as far as an analysis of truck turnaround, so that it's suitable for all future users.
our previous scheme had that, and we have been forced to pushing the building against the street frontage. So it means that
Mhm.
parking's gonna end up in the middle of the site. If you look at the site next door, for instance, they wouldn't have that kind of radius either. You know, the building where I want to call it backcountry brewing is, they have a much larger parcel, and yes, they can accommodate at the back of their building, there's a huge amount of, but this site is so small.
Chris
You know.
are civil engineers, they've done the turning radius for the fixed axle, for which would be associated with the garbage also, right? So, yeah, are you gonna get a tractor trailer in here? No. I mean, you could back it up the
There may be a
driveway
tenant
and leave it there,
requires
but,
one, that's
I mean,
all.
Dave, any need for that kind of?
No, we shouldn't need for I guess if they're concerned about, access.
You want to come in so that you can be heard?
Repeat yourself.
Yeah, sorry about that. I guess we hadn't planned on tractor trailers coming into the site because of the intended usage. The turning radius, as Chris looked at, should work for single or double axle trucks. If it was an issue, we could possibly narrow the landscape or widen the landscape slightly. But we wanted to create that ambiance of a courtyard in the middle.
The parking in the middle the aisle is much wider than it needs to be.
So I guess the answer is that no, an analysis on a bigger truck has not been performed.
Well, depends on
Just for the time.
what you mean by bigger truck, I guess. You know, there's all kinds of sizes depending on deliveries. But Squamish Freight, Comox typically have single axle trucks. Those are more normal usage for deliveries that we always get ourselves. So with larger deliveries, usually get straight to sites with the trains and whatnot. I wouldn't expect any deliveries like that on this usage.
But it could happen.
And in a
So
pinch,
that's-
in a pinch, then there is this street parking on the frontage, so, and then you've got a great ramp to bring whatever you need up by Dolly, I guess.
For a big rig, I don't think it's gonna be able to stop out front on Queensway, so. But it's just, it was just a question,
Yep.
that's all, so that hasn't been accounted for here, and that's fine. These entries through a parking stall into a loading bay, they are, each of them has a concrete apron, or is it a solid sidewalk?
The sidewalk is at the same level as the parking.
So you
there is
don't
no
have a drive-up apron, so you can drive into the bay?
Yeah, there's no barrier to prevent driving into the bay. The pedestrian surface slopes away from the building and is continuous with the asphalt
And at
surface.
each bay, there's a dip for,
No,
no?
no, the plane across the whole front of the building is the same,
So the surfacing is different, they are at the same elevation.
with no wheel stops.
And you could drive right in there, or do you have to bump over the sidewalk too?
No, sidewalks are the same plane, but sloping towards the center of the courtyard for
All
driving.
flush with the I see, okay. So, okay. Also, the question was, is that clear, so you've got in one building, you show what looks like 3 bays and the other in 4 bays. Is that a clear span? So let's say one tenant could take all 4 bays in one of the buildings and have clear span throughout?
Potentially, yes.
Potentially, no, okay. Great, thanks.
Actually, I have a couple
Yeah.
of questions. About the pavers, like around there, are those like intended to be permeable enough that they will act as some drainage around the building?
We had that discussion with the civil engineers and they agreed with me that a lot of the permeable pavers are probably only have a permeability life of about 5 to 10 years and then they choke. So what we went with was more conventional surface drainage to a drainage system, and then in the front landscape is a infiltration cell in and around that ramp. So that's how we'll deal with our stormwater management.
I just noticed that with that, at the rear of building 1, for example, like without there being a canopy on there too, if you, like combining heavy rain and wind, if that surface isn't permeable there, if that could potentially cause issues with.
At the rear, there's
water.
there's the potential for quite a slope off to the forest at the back. So there's a lot of good stormwater management behind the building. off
And
property.
building 1 as well? Is it just building 2?
It's,
Well-
the building 1, everything is drained to the center of the courtyard.
Okay.
So,
And the other question was, is there an intention of where the gym facility would be located?
again,
Is it stipulated?
you know, it takes quite a long time to go through the development permit process and then to get to a building permit process. So trying to find tenants, you know, 2 years in advance is, in this economic climate, is just not feasible. So at this, we know we have someone who's interested. Where are they getting located, and where everyone, that puzzle's gonna, you know, whoever is interested in this form of building as opposed to the other forms of building that are in the industrial park will kind of dictate what kind of tenants we have.
Well, I guess the context of my question is in the parking situation too, and also if, like, say if the gym was, you know, was stipulated that was located in the front building, then street parking would be, you know, quite viable, although I think it's gonna get quite busy along that stretch probably for street parking, but if it's located at the back and besides kind of clogging out the parking for the other tenants in there, in the middle of the winter at night in a pouring rainstorm, that's a long walk to go to get to the front door of your gym there too. So I'm just curious.
I agree
if
with
that's
you that
considered.
if I was the gym owner, I would prefer to be in the front building. You know, those are decisions that
Yeah, my question was just more
remain
of
to
like,
be made.
if it was stipulated.
No, it has not been stipulated. It would make sense that the gym would be in the front building.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Just to John's point, these could be double height, 24-foot ceilings, so if the tenant chooses not to put them as in correct.
Correct.
Am I reading that right? So you could have a single story, 24-foot ceiling
No. We
unit.
could
I
raise
think yours
that.
was front door.
No, I read solid floor in the plan on the.
Yeah, but it is the intent, you're gonna put in that second floor mezzanine, or is it tenant dependent? I.e. if one tenant gets the whole building and wants full height space.
And independent, really.
It's tenant dependent because, again, depending on who they are, what kind of businesses they're running, whether they want that full second floor or they don't want. So the parking count is based on full second
Right.
floor of every single unit. And so with that parking consideration is, part of it is if we end up with single floor, well, then we have twice as much parking as we need.
That's required, so it could accommodate high ceiling uses if you wanted a
Yeah,
climbing gym in
the
there.
other thing is, we originally had a third story with the flood control level getting raised by 0.5 meter. We ended up deleting that third story because it would have required a height variance, because where you measure the height from, the building has been raised, but where you measure the height from has not changed. So, so suddenly, right now, the building is under height, and we need to have those discussions with our client. This could easily be raised to the 14-foot level if that's the case, and we find that that's what tenants, potential tenants are really wanting.
Is there any plans for plumbing reference relative to windows on the outside?
Well,
As in, do some of the smaller windows, are those intended to be a bathroom or?
no,
Okay,
no, they're just,
that's it.
Okay. Just have a question about the use for the patios in the back. It's just gonna be those tenants' patios, imagine. Is there any ability to have a covered area or anything? It's just a flat wall in the back?
Maybe Perhaps
You looked at that?
tenant controlled where they could put their own picnic table or umbrella
Yeah.
and movable furniture, but no, we hadn't discussed doing any kind of structural cover. No.
Okay. Great, that's my only question. Is there any other questions out there?
Just one, the driveway is different on landscape than architecture, so just not sure which one's the actual intention. Architecture is a bit, fans out a bit wider.
Sorry, on.
On the architectural, it fans out a bit more, so I don't know if that was.
What's that?
On the architectural or the landscape?
No, the landscape
Oh, sorry,
one,
landscape.
I think I coordinated with structural, or with civil.
with civil, so
So it is,
Hang on a
it's
second.
the landscape plan that relates to civil a little bit.
you're looking at that lower floor plan, and this fans out, but not quite as.
Okay, so you think it's the landscape one?
Yeah.
So we're still, part of it is there's an easement on the front portion with regards to grading. So we're working with civil engineer as to how steep we come up. Do we come up as steeply as possible to get to the existing grade? Or do we just slope that longer and then
Right.
how wide it fans out at the,
Okay.
Gotcha. We're not quite using the existing curb that's there.
Okay.
Okay, more questions? Good. Comments? Sarah, do you have any comments?
I like the ramp. And then my only other comment would be to make sure that your paving is going to be contrasted from the asphalt
Yeah.
for anybody with a visual impairment.
It's tonally contrasting and textural contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just that the tone
Okay.
is not going to be too close to asphalt. That's it.
Tennis?
Yeah, I quite like that it's two buildings with the parking in the middle. So I'm happy that you showed your first rendition. I think the one thing that I'm getting a bit hung up on is that they're identical and that the palette is very muted. I think one of the guidelines says ensure an aesthetically attractive industrial development, and I think this could be a little bit more exciting. I think it's pretty gray, and we really have enough of that in Squamish, especially in this area. And I think you could do something exciting with color. I understand you wouldn't want to be bumping things out, that becomes cost effective or cost prohibitive. But yeah, I think maybe some color. And I do find that the heavy timbers, the knee braces, are really more of a residential architectural style. I think that this is kind of going that way and not really industrial looking. So just maybe consider a bit more color and maybe some more interesting roof lines. But yeah, I'm glad the two buildings I think works lovely with the parking in the center.
Just with regards to the parking and the interface of the CRUs, you had noted that the sidewalk and the parking is flush, but I think there could be some long-term concern with vehicles not really having a strong understanding of where they're supposed to stop and where the building sidewalk is. And you had noted that the central drive aisle was wider than required, so perhaps there would be opportunity to consider putting that to what the minimum standard would be to give some more flexibility to ensure that there is still the walkability along the building face. Because I think as soon as a vehicle parks beyond the parking lot line, that sidewalk really becomes unwalkable. So if there is that opportunity to widen that, I think that would be good, or find a way to have some sort of vertical queue to ensure that they understand where that limit is. And then I would encourage, you had noted some lighting within the front entry in terms of the stairwells and such, so I would encourage that to definitely occur, just to ensure that everyone has safe navigation in the evening. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Similarly, I quite like the two buildings and the kind of courtyard. I think when it's not fully parked or for social events or whatever, it's a good private space away from quite a busy street. And then I think the front ramp kind of formality, and with the plantings probably growing quite lush in the summers, I think would be really great. I'm wondering what that front space is going to be like in the winter when those grasses are cut, if you do cut them with snow. But I guess without those, I still don't mind it. I think that timber bench is really nice, and it's, in these places we don't usually get them. We always talk about a social space for tenants, so it's nice to see something built in. I agree with Tiana a bit. It feels quite residential to me, which maybe isn't a bad thing. Maybe that's more the architect's style. So although I wouldn't probably design it that way, it's kind of a nice contrast to all the other tilt-up that's going on with storage facilities and stuff, and I think the wood's going to really help that. So yeah, I would support that side of it. Yeah, I guess my only question is that 2-story versus 1-story. It's a bit odd window positioning if it's a double volume space. So I'd maybe think about that as you move forward. I don't know if some of them you could get some variety in having one of them cater more to a double volume. But otherwise it's kind of a simple, clean project which I'd support.
I've only got two main comments. One is just probably the sort of beige colour. I'm not a massive fan of. I don't know if that colour chip at the end, the way it's printed, truly reflects what that belly day colour looks like or not.
It's very similar to the other building.
The backcountry one?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then the second thing is just looking on some of the side elevations and seeing the wood cladding, and then as it turns a corner it just goes to a different material. So I'm guessing that the wood material is almost like a batten screen on top.
It is.
So,
yeah.
And will that just, when it goes on one wall face, does it just terminate? And there's no use of channels or anything?
No.
Okay. So that's probably my main concern, is when the finish turns a corner and immediately stops, whether that's the right decision or not. Yeah.
It's more of a applied accent as opposed to the finish.
Yeah, so it's more like a screening.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. Otherwise, it's great, thanks.
It's a great project. I think it sort of meets all the requirements of what Jerry is about. I think done a very good job as architects putting this together. I do like the building form. Agree with most of the comments already. I think just the ground plane could use a little bit more color, and that could be done through perhaps the pavers or just a little bit less gray, I think. I don't think, you can decide if you want the ramp or not. I don't think it's really needed, but I like the playfulness of it. I can see kids maybe hopefully using the bikes out of the wheelchairs. You want it to be really utilitarian. Other than that, thank you. It's great.
Okay. So, yeah, I think the overall look and feel of it was quite, I did a bit of a double take when I first opened it up on my computer, because I was like, is this a house or what are we doing? It looked very residential, but I think it's actually a nice location for something like that, given that it's sort of right on the cusp of the industrial park and the mud zoning area. So there's a bit of a transition that would actually happen between the two areas. Like the use of a lot of windows in there, because I think especially if it's going to end up being used, the second floors are going to be used too. That's going to create really nice workspaces in there, which some of the other industrial buildings do not. I like the continuous canopies around everything, which is very practical. And both the private patio space at the back, which is really considerate, but also the whole like front landscaping, like utilizing the ramp as a feature rather than a kind of an afterthought, which I think is really well done. I think it'll look nice and break up that street quite interestingly. Using the darker siding and panels at the grade level is also very practical too for the long term, and I think it helps break up the massing of the building as well. And using the gray stain as opposed to trying to get a cedar stain right down to grade level too, I think that will wear very well for the long term.
We had a cedar stain before, and then like.
Yeah, and using it above grade where it's, you know, where it's protected seems a lot more practical way of using it. Sorry, just looking here too. And the landscaping, I think that's really interesting and whimsical, that having something like the hops used and setting a precedent. It's something kind of different, but could end up being very functional too. So that's great to see something like that.
I'm going to start with the street front. I don't necessarily agree with that treatment for true utility and light industrial nature. I think it's pushing towards a sort of retail-y or residential style that I just really enjoy the utility and the openness and the welcoming nature of the front of, say, the Backcountry Brewing. And some people say they don't like parking stalls out in front. For light industrial, it really works, because if you're a customer and you need to get in and out quickly, you see there's a stall there, you go to it, you run in, you get your stuff, you go. This is going to confuse things a little bit. So I feel bad that you've been pushed towards that. I actually probably would have gone with your first design myself for true utility. I would highly encourage you to consider going higher, and in that taking the first story up to, let's say, 18 feet, and then having another story on top of that. I see no reason why greater height in that particular location shouldn't be a problem. It's not like you've got small residential houses right next to you or anything like that. Just a green space behind you. So, and it would truly open you up to more variety of tenants and probably a quicker lease out or sale, whatever your opportunity is, whether now or in many years in the future. It's just going to work better that way. I actually really like the exterior design in contrast with some of the other buildings around, so that's on a positive note. And then just to make a point about the turnaround, just to hopefully do an analysis on that. And maybe the answer is as simply as pushing the diffuse bins back a little bit so that a truck end could get a little further down that side to allow for a full turnaround. It might be that easy to do, and we won't have problems in the future. And that's it for me.
Okay. I also like the two buildings. It's a good looking project. Perimeter landscaped around the whole thing, which is missed on some of the other projects in this area. My only comment would be to provide a bit of shelter in the back for those patios. There's a lot of covered areas in the other frontage, but it'd be nice back there. That's my only comment. So is that all comments there? Okay, great. So let's vote. A, ADP supports the project as presented, does not need to see the project return. B, ADP supports the project in general and would like the applicant to work with staff on following recommendations.
Make that motion.
Okay. C, ADP supports the project, would like the applicant to resolve the following recommendations and return to present the revised project to ADP. Or D, we don't support the project. So we have a motion for B. Seconded Shan. Okay. John.
Yeah,
So-
so Sarah and Jan.
Yeah.
And do you guys want me to read the suggestions that I have here, or?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Okay, so your comments included the ramp, whether or not that's necessary or not. Are we including that as a
Yep.
suggestion?
Yeah, they'll look at it.
Okay. The palette is muted. The buildings look residential versus industrial. Concerns about contrast of the ramp and lighting on the ramp.
Yeah, it's of the paving.
Yeah, of the paving.
Yeah, but the paving, the ramp is poured concrete.
Okay,
The
yeah.
paving is different than the ramp.
Concerns about the sidewalk being flush. Suggestion to have one of the buildings cater to a double volume. Suggestion to change the beige color. Utility compromise for parking due to frontage requirements. And then another suggestion to go higher to accommodate more types of tenants. And then suggestion for coverage of the back area. Did I miss anything that you guys want to add in there?
Possible look at the loading to provide a truck turnaround.
That's analyze the turnaround.
Analyze the
Because we've
turnaround.
already provided it, yeah.
Yeah.
There was just some specific comments around the color gray, instead of too much gray, so potentially putting the wording in that way. Too much gray? Okay. Do you want to call the question?
Should
Or is
we-
there further comments?
No, I think that wraps it up. We can vote on that. So, who votes for B? All in favor?
Just a
Carried.
A question, thank you. Question to Carrie. If the client did choose to increase building height, as long as it was within the zoning, that would not require a turning panel?
No, and a variance such as that wouldn't have to come back to panel two if you wanted to propose a height variance.
Not a variance,
Okay.
just change in
No,
height,
no.
as panel had suggested.
No, that would be
Okay.
addressing their comments,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, good job.
Great.
Thank you.
Unanimous. Okay, we're reconvening here for DP 487-1111 Pioneer Way in the industrial park area. Here to present for this district is Aja.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, Richard, I'll take over. Okay, so this application was also submitted prior to our new OCP coming into effect. So they are also under development permit area 6. It's 6 only, it's not, the previous one was 6A as well. So this one is only under 6. And I'll just quickly run through the development before I pass it along to the architect. It's under the MUD 1 zoning. And so we've got a 4-story building that is basically overheight industrial bays with mezzanine on the ground floor. So equivalent kind of to 2 normal stories. And then there's 3 stories of apartments above that. There's 60 units of apartments and 18 of those units are purpose-built market rental, which we will secure through a housing agreement. There's also surface parking proposed, so they've got 137 spaces proposed. There's a few variances. The first one is for loading from 3 spaces down to 2. And the second variance is to change the open space definition, and this is basically to allow a smaller minimum dimension that would then allow them to meet the open space minimum requirement. There's a very minor setback, rear setback reduction to allow for the solid waste room at the back of the property. And there's a variance to the parking lot landscaping requirements in the district zoning bylaw to basically remove the landscaping islands requirement, which would only apply to the rows that are directly fronting the building. And so essentially staff are seeking ADP's typical comments around the form and character of the building, site plan, architectural design, materials, landscape plan. There's just one thing that staff would like to highlight for ADP, and that's that there's a small excess of 3 parking spaces proposed, and there's potential at the rear lot. If they were to drop these spaces, they could probably increase their amount of open space. And so that's the only thing that I wanted to highlight. When reviewing it against DPA 6, in staff's opinion, all of the guidelines have been met. I'll pass it along to the architects.
Okay, thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Bunting, Studio B Architects.
I'm Scott from Studio B Architects.
Bryce Gauchier, Enns Landscape.
I think a lot of the material. Can we get these out?
Yeah, I'll go.
Maybe we'll move right away to the next slide. Just
You'll have to.
The lights are off, could you sit down, please?
Can I yell? Can I stand and yell?
Yeah, I think that's
I'll try.
sufficient.
Yeah.
Yeah, the microphone is.
Okay. The new. On again?
He'll turn him off when he goes in his.
Oh, okay.
so.
With the new MUD 1, which is was very interesting and I was going to say challenging, but not really challenging. It's kind of exciting to kind of be part of this new zone that allows the mix of light industrial with the residential, and especially with the residential being a mix of 30% rental, notwithstanding that the ownership, straight ownership units could be rental also. So we've sort of designed it within that context, trying to do a very efficient building on the site, trying to get as much density as possible. And even within the bounds of this site, it's hard to get a high density. It's a very interesting way to figure out density when you get plus density for getting ground floor density. So obviously getting as much of the light industrial units as possible was a demand of this zone. And then keeping, I guess, a practical, somewhat practical application to, in many senses, trying to keep the mix, socioeconomic mix good and keep the costs down so that I think all the objectives of the zone could be met as much as possible. So it came to actually a very simple form, dictated a lot by the number and mix of vehicles that are going to enter and exit the site. Sort of contrary or in difference to the last one, it just kept being, obviously the way to do it was to have a complete drive around the whole site. There was no other way to sort of make, we thought it work well. The benefit of that, of course, was to, from the residential side, we had no interference from any neighbors because actually when we started, we had no idea what the forms were going to be around us. So we were very good distance even on the north end from all other buildings, and some of them are getting pretty close, so we're pretty happy that we're far away. With big decks, and really, to me, the most Squamish thing about Squamish is the part around Squamish, which is the mountains, and making sure we had dynamic views. Everybody had a view. The other interesting thing about the development of the site, and it's hard to see, but if you can see in that information, it'd be great if we could turn the lights down. Right where we took the, it's almost about a third of the way up the building where the lobby happens. but it's only about less than a quarter of a way up the residential building. That is where the zone goes on the MUD 1. It goes from zone 1 to zone 2. And there's a higher density on zone 2 as we move to the north. So we tried a number of forms to try to deal with that in a dynamic way. And we came to this one more because we really grabbed the idea early that we could, within the site, we could split our open space requirement and get 2 and perhaps, I'll talk about a third open space that doesn't count within the open space, spaces. So there's one that's on the ground, and Bryce will talk more about these in a few minutes. But we really like the idea of having a roof deck one that everyone could have. It was like a community deck where it could be elevated, big enough to incorporate a number of uses in it, and some active uses in it, especially maybe for the younger, more gregarious people in the mix of the building. And really, just to say it's a safer place too. And then we have the one on the kind of the back side. And then also within that, there is the trail that we early on discussed with planning to sort of bisect the whole new mud zone. Not, again, particularly knowing at the time where things would go, but I think it was most appropriately placed on the east side. Coming off Queensway, you see where you're going, and we identify as much as possible where the front door is going to be, and that there's something happening down here. So bike paths, obviously a big thing in Squamish, and communities like this. We will build a bike path in front on Pioneer Way, the extension of Pioneer Street coming down to Queensway. Transit on Queensway is obviously a great thing, and maybe we can turn on the model now. Can we get the lights off? You'll see it much better. Do you know which one it is?
He's doing
He
it
can,
over there.
he can,
Oh, he's there. Oh, yeah. Thinking, where to go? There you go. So again, as you're coming towards it, we wanted to have some animation to it. We've sort of set up, again, Bryce will talk more about it, the front end of the building to be the more kind of interactive uses, sort of like our neighbor down the street, Backcountry, which we hope will steal from them as a lease because we got nicer space. And this is coming down, sort of showing the entry of the building, trying to highlight it in a sort of muted, demonstrative way, I'd say. The pathway continues up the east side. We're hoping it might even integrate with the neighbor to the east, which we're not sure exactly the form of development there. Numerous bike racks and a bike wash to sort of mark a node and perhaps a community space happening there, because I know in all my travels through Squamish and Whistler and places, bike wash is a really good community space. The whole pathway, which is undersized, it's not 20 feet wide, it's only 15 feet wide. We're hoping to get some neighbor buy-in at some point. And benched, and drainage swales through it, and then leading to the back space. And again, I'm probably stealing all Bryce's thunder, sorry. And then, really looking at the building, trying to get as many balconies as possible, as much outdoor space. I think that's a very Squamish thing, outdoor, and it's covered as much as possible, so it overhangs. And a kind of more traditional, I don't know if I want to call it industrial modernist flavor to the building. We picked up a lot of cues from the backcountry development. We liked its sort of muted elegance and when you look closer in more detail at ours, we have a lot of sort of metal highlights to it, which will be, taken up as signage and numbering and sort of things that we can have fun with, metal accoutrements to the building. There is the back door, obviously, to come in through parking from both sides of the building. The garbage room is in there. And then sort of back around, trying to highlight maybe our third space, which is our setback. So it doesn't count as part of the space, but we really would like to see something, more interesting and animated happen here. The distillers, the brewers, the bakers should come to this end of the building. Yeah, and then really from a suite layout, we're trying to have as much open space as possible because there's a live-work element to the project also. And storage, very important in a playground town. So we have, on 50% of the units, we have dedicated bike rooms with so Class A bike attachments. People can use them for what they want, and adjacent to that, a full storage space also. And then the people who don't have them in suite, which is where the $10,000 bikes like to stay, there is at the end in the plan, is that the next one, Scott? I think you can see it in your plan. Sort of towards the nose of the building in the outdoor community space, there is the rest of a one mic secured locker per suite, close to the elevator. Over there, in the front nose, you can see it. And it's also a way that you come from the elevator, and everyone from different floors come from the elevator, go to the front open space, and aren't passing that many doors of residences. I think that's most of my highlights of it. I'll wait for interesting questions. Yeah, I think that's it. If you want to ask questions about the flood grading or the flood construction law, we can kind of tell you how we progress through the district with that also. Chris?
Good afternoon, everyone. Do you mind just flipping through? Let's start with the foot. Yeah, perfect. So I was taken with the forest character of the site, and I think it really starts with an opportunity to set back on Pioneer Way where we actually can't park in front of the site. And I think that posed a challenge, but it also posed an opportunity, and that is to try to maintain the forest character, in some sense the rural character of Squamish as best we can in a redevelopment. And I think that's something that this project's been successful at. Of course, the site is radically changing, but I feel like some of the ways we've treated it also at the same time keep some of those remnants, whether it's the buffers planting around the edge, the open space, or just the quality of the planting buffer along the edge, integrated with swales and a palette of materials that's native and local, and reminiscent of both the natural and industrial character of Squamish. So those are the kind of cues that we took, the cues from the site and the opportunity that the building form gave us and the setbacks gave us to try to do that. So just starting with that site assessment and understanding that the context is going to change dramatically, but also trying to keep some of those remnants. It's important to us. The next page. Some of the existing trees on site, and the next page after that. So you can see how the planting around the perimeter obviously is constrained by the realities of the parking and the loading and the access and the utilities and infrastructure. But at the same time, it's just wide enough we feel that we can achieve some of those objectives. Where there are small islands, there are opportunities for larger trees that will grow into small and medium-sized canopy trees. Where there's a back area, there is an opportunity for a bit of a wetland remediation project, but also that's integrated into a deck structure and possible pathway connection to adjacent buildings. That's a little bit larger, and also because of the slope, allows the planting to face the building into the site at the north edge. And then to the east, there's, as Tom was mentioning, there's the pathway connection and again, a thick edge of planting and more rainwater infiltration detention that will eventually lead you back to the street. And my favorite bit, I suppose, would be on the ground plane, at least Pioneer Road, that opportunity for the building that addresses the street. And while we've kept we have the opportunity in that buffer to create a lot of naturalized planting with some small conifer trees, lots of deciduous and lots of shrubs. At the same time, we have this permeability in these three connections with the three steps that create a nice plinth that goes to an open space that would be primarily for a brew pub kind of thing is what we're hoping, or a tasting room anyway, or some sort of use, could be a cafe, could just be retail, but the kind of use that would invite people to stay. So at the same time, it's very rural and reminiscent of what used to be there, and the character of, I think, some of the in its materiality and its planting. At the other end, it's also very urban, and it enhances, I think, the streetscape. And one of the things we noticed when walking through, not just Pioneer Road, but along Backcountry and some of the other roads nearby, is that there tends to be almost an industrial park feel to some of the older developments. We want this to be a rural feel, but at the same time have some of the benefits of a more urban street. And I only use urban in the sense of having eyes on the street, having unit access and access to special events and program. And in that sense, I feel it's urban, but at the same time, it's also very rural and very natural. So I think the setback, although it's small, is doing a lot. And we've tried our best to consider it as best we can. And then, of course, as Tom mentioned, we also have the bike lane and the street and just the regular planting of street trees. All those elements together create a very considered front entry. The back entry is do we have, we'll go to the next plan because I think we can talk about that. Yeah, sorry, I wasted all my ammo on the last slide and I should have been talking to this one. But anyway, I think it just becomes a little more clear. Some of our materials, large stone, slab stone, large heavy timber benches made of hardwood timber, such as cedar or fir, that would be rough hewn as benches, concrete steps, little wooden bridge features, and you can see the sidewalk and the cafe or seating areas. Moving to the next slide. This is a little blow-up area of the rain garden swales and the bike washing station and storage station, which you see to the north edge, and how that integrates into the storm rain garden features along the edge of the parking area. So the parking area, all the water in that area will slope to the west and into these infiltration galleries before it hits the road. And those are some of the larger scale trees that demarcate the border of the site. Next slide. And here's what I was just about to touch on, again, the water runoff from the asphalt. And I agree with the previous landscape architect who spoke and said that the permeable paving system really doesn't work, especially in a condition where you have a high water table. Even if it doesn't silt up in the winter when we get all our rains, it's full of water anyway. So it's not the perfect product for the climate we get in the Pacific Northwest. So the asphalt sloping to a rain garden does make the most sense for a variety of reasons. So there's an ephemeral rain garden there that will fill up with water at times but have drought tolerant marginal planting in it. And then there's the wood boardwalk area that could also allow for a future connection to adjacent sites once their building grades have been set. And then just a heavy planted area of conifer trees primarily along the boundary there to really kind of create a remnant forest character kind of edge. And a really robust planting palette that we still need to run through. City has reminded me there's the bear and probably deer filter for plants that we have to make sure we pull a couple species out. But
Just bear.
Just bear? Okay. All right, that's good to know. So just bear. That makes it a little easier. And moving on to the next slide, the one after. Really excited about this space, and Tom touched on it. This is a wonderful roof deck opportunity for us, where you come in off the corridor and you come into a space, and the central spine of it is a covered paved area that allows for outdoor barbecuing, eating, entertaining. We're using the stair penthouse. We're extending the roof to create that covered area so that if it does start to rain in the spring, if you want to have a barbecue, it's not the end of the world. And then there's an outdoor urban agriculture area. There's raised planters to create a bit of a buffer between uses. There's a lot of seating. There's trees for privacy between the patios. And then you move to your left and you really have a bit of a fun zone. So you come around that paving area to the other side of the building, and there's a climbing wall, a proposed bocce court made of artificial turf. So it's really the idea that you can really entertain here, and multiple generations can entertain here. So you can eat and have a party, you can come around and do a bit of climbing or have martinis and bocce ball. You can use the play area, and I know that every kid, whether it's Vancouver to Whistler and everywhere in between, are pretty avid when it comes to biking these days, when it comes to using playgrounds in different ways, and it's not just the kids using the playgrounds. So we're not just thinking of this as a kid-only play space, and we're not just putting a big structure in the center. We're doing a poured-in-place mound on polystyrene, which adds no weight, but creates a great spot for bikers and tricks, and using the slide to stainless steel slide to grind on, and whatever you want. So there's plenty of opportunity for fun of kids of all ages, and also using the heavy timber again and bringing in some wood elements that are more appropriate for the neighborhood. Probably talked a little too much, so I've touched on the plants. I hope that's everything, and we can cover the rest of the questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Nice to see that visual 3D there. Appreciate that. So we'll do a round of questions and then a round of comments.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay. John, do you have any questions? You want to start with questions?
I guess one of my questions is connectivity, but you answered that, and there's a nice sort of contingency for it. I guess that has to wait until we've got some agreement with the neighbors as to what will happen then. Obviously, it was one of the early ideas for the whole zone. Is there still some fencing on the property line with paths through, or is it just a wide open sort of transition into the neighborhood?
I think there's no thought of fencing at this point. We don't know exactly what's to the west. I think the one maybe addition is the last time we met Vija is that to take a pathway, extend that corner pathway across, there's a wall there, and I think there's some landscaping from the north side, and then and then have a sort of breezeway through between the two northern buildings. We haven't linked it together, but there is an opportunity to do that. We've got room, and I think there's room on the other side, so I think there's probably something we can do there. Because I think Asia, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's indeterminate about the site to the northeast is right now.
Correct.
The sort of panhandle piece there. So.
Other question is, what's the height of the bay doors? Have you left one?
10 foot.
10 foot? Yep. Is there an opportunity to make those higher on a case-by-case basis? If you had a user that needed a 14-foot door for enough?
Well, the space is predicated on kind of like an industrial storage and such. There's a bit of a marketing look at what that is. And so the bay, besides the bay size, we had to link it with unit sizes of buffer structure. We also looked at kind of optimal sizes, and it wasn't. I mean, the height is about 20 feet and 60% of it because of the allowed for 40% mezzanine at the front. Mm-hmm. At the front, mostly because you get windows, it has to be at the front. So really, the 10 foot wasn't seen as necessarily driving right in to it, but and because we have the height of the mezzanine at the front. So
yeah, well, that's the other question: is that mezzanine optional? Does it have to be at the front? Could it be put at the back by a user that might want to have some height at the front of the space?
Sure. We're allowing for it as it's part of the kind of mix of this zone that you can do office on the second floor, like commercial on the second floor. This is a mezzanine. Mm-hmm. It could, almost be separated. So yeah, I mean those are it's sort of like the walls between the units. It's a column-based system. People can take more than one unit. They can move that all around. as long as it fulfills the.
So you could have double and triple bays with no, it would be clear span?
I mean, I think that's the idea, yeah. I mean, there's a certain.
It looks to be
sheer
drawn
amount
as far, it looks to be drawn as structural walls in between, but I take it that those could be removed if someone combined 3 or 4.
I mean, and there's, between the elevator core, stair cores, there's probably a few more, and the outside being a tilt up, we get shear out of that. It's just making sure we got the shear allotment as we move forward. But, you know, a lot of that will happen, you know, leases will happen, and we'll just, like many speculative projects, you take your best guess when you're designing.
Well, you build clear span and then add in the non-structural walls.
Yeah. And we know where the beams have to go, we know the joists and all that, and the columns, but yeah, the walls, the infill walls, and the mezzanines, it's up to the town.
Interesting. I think that's it for me right now. Shan?
Okay, the canopies that are over the industrial base, was there ever like a consideration of making those continuous rather than segmented? And a reason for doing that as opposed to them being continuous?
We discussed that with the district. We like the cadence of it not being, I'll tell you from a design point of view. And that the continuousness, I'm not sure. I mean, we're not encouraging people to walk in front of those units. It's more the people who are using the units, and that's why we provided the kind of deluxe driveway out front.
Well, we might want to point out that the front is continuous.
Yes, I noticed that.
Yeah, and then it starts to break up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just in case.
Yeah, I just wondered.
I mean,
what,
it's in
consideration.
development in some sense, and we did look at trying to get, just to put up this glass or something across it and do it as a minimalist piece across it, but I think we just don't see, we like the look better, we don't see the usage really happening across the front because we don't want to encourage that, so we don't want to signal that also.
Okay. So the outdoor space that is in the northwest corner of the lot, I'm curious about what sort of the intended use is of that space.
Primarily, I mean, it's a working culture if you take away the fact that the people above have their own amenity space. So it is primarily for people moving through the site, and as well as for people just sitting like on a lunch hour who might work in the area. It's more of a passive space than an active.
Okay. And was there ever any consideration about still that use of it, but possibly implementing something that was sort of a child-activated element to it, or did you specifically want to keep that out of there?
I guess, given the size and the future grading implications, it'd be a fun element for kids given grade change, but I would fear that you're going to have a parking lot that's going to be 90% full during the day. I'm not sure, and then you're going to be backed up against a grade change on the other side. My only concern is that would it be the appropriate space for children in terms of traffic and that sort of thing, or parked cars, and it's a small space, and it wouldn't have terrific sight lines from certain angles. So that would be maybe the best reason.
Okay, and is there, actually this is more for Asia than anything, is there any stipulation or guideline in the mud zoning regarding there being fencing between the properties, or is the intention that they're supposed to be all connected too? So is there, because this seems great about how the flow through the site so far, but with another project coming in, if they're wanting fencing up there, that could disrupt how this is all working.
Yeah, so there's no specific regulation in Mud 1 zone that speaks to requiring fencing. It would just be subject to our normal zoning general regs that speak to fencing and the maximum height if they want to do that. I can't speak to the new DP guidelines off the top of my head, which every other application coming forward now is going to be in the new OCP guidelines. These are the last guys to come through under the old ones, and the new ones are quite a bit more thorough.
Okay. Another question is the, like, fire lane road going around the north elevation of the building, is that intended to be more like a fire access situation, or is that is the idea that it would be used continuously throughout the day?
Both. It's both. Yeah.
If you were, let's say, loading something heavy into one of these units, there might be a disruption. The residents could still come around the other direction. So it's redundant in that case, some industrial going on. And it's also located the 2 loading bays at the back of the building.
Okay, that's my questions.
Just a question for you, how many applications have come through the months already? We saw one about several months ago. And then the first one, is there anything, this is
Target or the other?
Yeah, this one to the west
The rail yard?
also came through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's interesting at this question is that I know the zoning's been set up and it's a bit of a different zoning than mix. It's myself, I'm looking for good examples or trying to find good examples as to how it applies or how these regulations are applied to. So, it's not really a question. The question was how many other applications, and there probably is like 2 or 3. We saw one, right?
So 2 tenancies and then targets.
Yeah, so there's been 2, these guys are the 3rd. Chris
Hung
may
up
be
in
the
FCL.
4th. We'll see.
And the second question was just the function of the roof deck as is it the vertical circulation there, so the intent would it could be used by the occupants of the building, i.e. the residents. And is it also being used by the tenant below to be able to stairwell? So it would be segregated, so residential use.
Yeah, I think the stewards should be next. I mean, it's partly the decks on the ground, on the lower residential floor, which set back anywhere from 9 to 13 feet. Just again, even try to separate it from vehicles below, people are idling. I mean, there's not much you can do about it in any situation, but I think it's to be private and to be secured. I mean, secured as much as anything. Secured.
Okay. I'm not sure if someone asked this before, but how the car parking being designated between commercial use and residential?
It's all marked on the drawings, but generally the commercial and the visitor parking is on the inside, and the residence is on the outside.
Okay.
Dean, there's also a table in the staff report that talks about how many spaces are devoted to each use.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You meant more graphically though, or something?
Yeah. Well, if I turned up, would I know? Like, would I accidentally park in what's actually a residential spot or not?
From the commercial side? Yeah, I think that's a good question and something we should look into.
I can speak to one thing is that I believe in the MUD 1 zone it explicitly states there's some that you're allowed to share residential visitor parking with commercial parking stalls, and those have to be marked. That's called out in the zoning.
Right.
I guess that would be something that we would be looking for.
Okay, because it kind of reminds me of right next to the fire station there, that development. I can't remember
The spectacle building?
Yeah, and it says, I don't know, every time I go there.
You don't know where to park?
Yeah, got no idea. And so I see the same sort of problem here.
Yeah.
In many cases, just in general, not even this type of thing, is that they are marked, they're numbered, and they're painted, reserved, or they're called reserved.
It needs to be, whatever it is, something that's obvious to someone coming from outside. Second one, can you gain access to the stairs on the ends to go up, or are they an exit only?
I mean, typically they're exit only. I think we had conversations with someone else asked about it, that if it was accessible, we'd be one way.
People walking from the back. We talked about the back stair.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I ask is that the primary access is like 1/3 to the front, and so it's a long way to go And it sort of builds on another question of whether you looked at, you've got 9 commercial bays from that point onto the back. Did you look at an option to sort of like help break that up at all?
We kind of did the classic, golden section, and did 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 2/3. Also, it was to hold the entry as reasonably close to kind of street road or way, depending on what you're looking at. Get it visible, and also make sure that the elevator is close to the community space. So there's trade-offs. There's definitely trade-offs between that. And we actually jogged the interior and the building to try to break that up.
And I'm not sure if you explained before, how did you end up getting the easement on the east side? That east neighbor, which is over this area?
Lawyers and...
Okay. That's another landowner, right? So you just got to...
There was a quid pro quo on the shift because there was the existing property has this jogged line that you can see. So it's pretty predominant, and it makes probably each side more difficult.
Oh, so you did a trade-off, like...
So it was kind of split the difference in square feet.
Oh, okay. Right.
I can speak to a bit of the background as we have been talking continually. We're hung up in quite an earlier part of the process in FCL relaxation to get down to similar levels so we can have some of the cross-pollination with grade. But definitely the intent, in that side yard, bike path, garden makes total sense for connectivity for what's planned. So,
to make that node bigger, make it more
twice
aggressive.
as wide. So I think the other properties may be a bit different, but quite big property to this property. The intent is to link them.
Cool. All right. Let's go to question 6.
What's the corrugated metal cladding? What's the actual corrugation? Is it 7/8? Or is it a big
on the front of the
corrugation?
units. We haven't thought about that in detail. Principally, that's
and then similar question for the...
We're also talking about, would we lay the tilt up in corrugation?
Yes, cast that into the concrete.
And cast it and try to do something like that.
Yes. And similar, do you know what cement panel you're using? Is it going to be something with trims, or is it going to be a...
I'm sure that's what we talked about.
We're talking about that on the way here.
Okay.
I'm not sure yet.
Okay. Any discussion? I know it's budgetary, but for the very, very, very large roof plan on the top, to do anything about albedo or green roof or...
Possibly, but I think we spent a lot on the lower deck. I hope we still have all that stuff. I think that's a good idea, but the idea in everything that we do in town and that has to have decks, right? Like roof decks. We got the stairs up to dog houses and other decks. And as a community roof deck, just like the best is not to go up to the roof, right? Just go straight out.
Oh, I love the community roof deck. I'm talking the upper roof.
No, I agree.
It's a large building on right now forested lot, so that's, I know, a big part of OCP discussions, and I just have to ask it every time. So, but
we appreciate it.
That's it.
We'll take it to heart.
Thanks for your presentation. With regards to parking, I'm wondering if you could speak to looking at the staff balance of the parking, and if you could speak to the residential proportion and why it looks like there's 20 stalls less than required. However, there's a shared industrial visitor, so I'm just wondering about that distribution.
I think as Asia said, we're 3 more. Is it 3?
Yeah, so in the table that I provided in the staff report, I kind of laid out how you guys were allocating the total spaces. So you're meeting your total requirement. You've chosen to allocate differently. I can speak to this a little bit more because at the planning level, we don't go out on site and check to see if the allocation has played out the way that our zoning bylaw dictates for triggering the number of spaces. And so to me, that's fine if they want to allocate that way. We haven't been kind of enforcing that.
But does that mean that there's a shortage of parking for the residential component?
Well, there could be a perception of a shortage if it doesn't align with our parking minimums anyways.
We
I
talk a
think
bit
they're
about the
doing.
reasoning behind that.
Yeah,
Some of it is, we've got these industrial bays all the way around the inside.
Yeah.
So it kind of has to be industrial parking along there because you can't have a residence car parking your loading bay as your business. And then on the sales side, on the client side, they think that that's an appropriate amount of parking for residential. I don't remember what the number is. And then the rest will be shared visitor. And you could see it very plausible after hours, residents could park in the commercial parking. If this is light industrial, there's not people working after 6 p.m., it's a 9 to 5 thing.
Right.
So you could park your second or third vehicle in one of the industrial spaces and that would be posted.
So you're accommodating one stall minimum per unit, or?
Yeah, one stall for the 1 bedrooms and
Okay.
I think 2 for the 2 and 3 bedrooms.
So this would just be extra additional parking per unit, would be a bonus essentially?
Yeah, there's quite a few visitor stalls in there that
Okay.
could be used by residents as well.
I'm wondering if you could speak a bit more about the design of the entry of the residential entrances.
Yeah, let me pull the image up.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were trying to make it stand out from the rest of the building, but of course be part of the rest of the building. And honestly, there's a big space above, which is the mechanical space, that we haven't addressed to our satisfaction, that's for sure. I don't think we're done on it, but I think it's to mark it and to not really break the building up, but to mildly break the building up. Okay? As I call it, we see it as it's this industrial residential mix, and I think what happened is that the industrial modified the residential and the residential modified the industrial, kind of brought it up with a little more detail than normally would happen. I really like the one that Backcountry's in. I think that's really done well for keeping it restrained. We went a little bit further than that, given the residential building and people that are on top of it. And so the entry was not to break the whole mass and make it really residential. We wanted to keep the strong horizontal lines. We think that's strong, and very West Coast to be strong horizontal. So what all I can say to it, we're trying to bring in the accents there to sort of separate it from the industrial units, and I don't know, I'm completely satisfied right now.
Anyone have any other more questions?
Okay, I've got some questions. Can you tell me what the elevation change is from Pioneer Way up to the front of the building where the patio is?
It's about half a meter from a bit more as you go east.
Okay. How are you proposing if somebody is walking to get on the sidewalk of Pioneer Way and they can't use stairs?
Go back to the plan.
You can take the sound scope.
Yeah, so the stairs along the front, the ramp is in the parking area.
Right,
So
but if you want to walk down to Pioneer Way, then you have to go through the traffic. Right? If you can't use
Yeah, or
stairs.
you could take this pathway. Great, actually.
Where's the ramp?
The ramp is here. That would be the great change.
Okay, and is that a paved pathway, the recreational pathway?
This part is that gravel or is
That would probably be gravel.
Fine, what about through?
Crush.
Yeah, I guess we could look at that.
go there.
So unless
not
that,
much.
yeah, unless it's going to be like well compacted gravel, it's not going to be doable.
Yeah, great.
I think we need to, it's not a very steep grade at all. I mean, we're only.
Pardon me?
It's not a very steep grade, so I think we can achieve something. Something that you don't see right now off that front corner that Scott really showed.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
there's lots
something in there
of
should be
people
doable.
with baby buggies here as well, right? So that's a consideration. And then I wanted to speak about what's the size of the bathroom units? The size of the bathrooms
Oh, in the unit plans?
in the unit plans.
They're designed to meet the Vancouver accessibility guidelines, so there's
Oh, there.
it's not a it's not a full, what you call an accessible bathroom, but there is room for a wheelchair, there is a kind of box remover in there. And we put the controls for the tub on the opposite side of the toilet and things like that to
Okay,
improve that.
okay. And then is there, you spoke about it earlier, but is there a plan to be connected to the rear, or to the northern sites? And like, because the elevation grade is there, it looks like there's stairs at the back of the unit.
We did an earlier scheme that actually proposed a ramp at the back.
Yeah.
But we then got feedback from the city to hold off on that until we knew what the grading is. So that's something that, depending on what the plan is for that site, we'll have to incorporate.
Because
The one I was talking about earlier, where you come all the way around the back side, and then there's a between the two buildings on the left. I think we need to get through there.
This is at grade, this pathway, at grade around and connects to here. There's an 11-foot height difference from that point to this point here. And there's a staircase on the neighbor's lot, proposing to access up to that common space.
But you're saying there's an at-grade pathway that leads on the other side of the planting, on your side of the planting, over to between the buildings?
Yes, this line here is at grade.
It's at-grade, okay.
And it follows through to, we would prefer that the main pathway happen along this bikeway that we established through. It's a bit better from a neighborhood connectivity, but that's certainly another way through. And if you're ambulatory, you could use the stairs to come up to this space.
Yeah, that's not going to be happening for me. Okay, that's all my questions, thanks.
Okay, was there any you see you can't drive into any of these bays, there's a curb on the frontage? Is there any
Be a roll.
Yeah, I just discussed this.
A slight
V shape.
Oh, okay, so it'll be mountable, you can get in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not too mountable. We've seen other things in Squamish where it's easy to roll through.
Yeah.
So we want to make it safer for you walking around.
Okay, and then on that walking, you've got a sidewalk width of 1.524 meters or something? And if that's your wheel stop, you've got no sidewalk at all with the overhang of the bumpers. Is there any consideration on widening that sidewalk, or does that pinch your parking at all? You've got a 6.5 drive-through lane. Could that go to 6?
That's the minimum. The district's rules for parking perpendicular.
Minimum parking, okay. That's,
I mean, the laneway is 6.5 is minimum.
Okay.
Already. We're trying to keep the landscape buffer on the outside as well.
Okay. And the landscape
I mean,
buffer?
besides in front of the doors, I mean, the only other thing is to do with stops then.
Yeah, which is not good, okay.
I mean, when you look at all the other industrial units, there's this like mishmash of no sidewalks whatsoever.
Yeah.
And then sidewalks, but generally people go where they want to go or
Yeah.
drive where they want to drive.
Right. You talk about backcountry being so successful, and they don't have any parking in that frontage, so they can spill out onto the sidewalk and use that
Take
frontage.
that, yeah.
And whereas you're not going to see any of that.
I mean, that's the big reason why the south end happens to be south perfect, and it's right at the street.
Yeah.
But we're really, I mean, you can see it's not retail, so you can't do retail there. The use isn't allowed, but you can do the sort of light industrials,
Yeah.
like up to bakers and distillers and the brewers and things like that when we're there. and because we have that kind of extra piece, so that's where we're saying it should happen. And without it being retail, I think it makes it a little modern industrial at the end there. So I think that's what we're encouraging that to happen. But
Yeah. Yeah.
we don't have any tenants, so I don't know.
Okay. So you summarize, you have mountable curbs, so you can drive into those bays.
So you can just, you can back in.
Okay.
And, extend your length a bit more, because if you've got a really big truck, you're gonna have to go back to the other,
Yeah.
and, you know, wheel stop back, or, you know, honestly, what happens is people just stop on the drive out, and
Yeah.
move on. And if that happens, it happens. But again, as Scott said, I think we had to circumnavigate the site, not just for the fire truck, but for blockage of other people
Yeah.
also.
Yeah, it's definitely good circulation through for sure. And when you're in the loading space, how do you just wheel stuff around into each individual bay? You don't have...
there's no back of house corridor or anything there.
Yeah.
Because again, we're trying to leave it flexible to not have that impede what could happen. So people could go straight through, right? There could be right through units.
Right. Yeah.
And we don't need that corridor. I think everything's going to have to reflect that.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's my questions. Thanks. So any other lingering questions out there before we go to comments?
Just one question I do have, that's right. Is there a requirement for the width of the recreational trail from the city's perspective?
We have trail minimums for district trails, but I think when it's a voluntary thing that's been added to the site, we didn't say there have to be a minimum.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The hope again is that we're going to get some from Chris's side too.
Thanks.
Okay. Question?
Quick one, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Just curiosity what's your sort of situation with sound abatement between the industrial use and the residential above? Is there anything special going on there for that?
No. I mean, again, if you look closely at the sections, the setback isn't much. You know, sound kind of dissipates out like that. That's not it. Oh yeah, I mean, the separation, we've got a hollow core slab there. So there's a fire separation, there's a vibration separation. I mean, it does a whole number of things. I'm happy that that's the way we're going to go. And, you know, it'll stop a lot of what's happening. I was thinking more from the outside, kind of the inside. No, but I think that's a good one. If anything rumbling underneath you.
20 inches of hollow core.
Yeah.
It's not as substantial.
It's standard for separating the two uses?
I've never done these two uses, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, usually you've got
Better than wood frame and drywall. And concrete, right? So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, usually if you have to, that would be a lot of concrete. A lot of times it just, it's just concrete. It's industrial. I mean, you just got, joists and deck, and it does the fire, it does everything. I think it separates, like two different zones.
You insulate it just because if the commercial turns their heat off in the day, the residents don't get cold.
As well, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I didn't hear that point. It's a good point.
It's a good point. Yeah, you got concrete, but you could insulate the underside just because the industrial space would turn the heat off and the people above would have cold feet, so it can be treated.
As in the spray foam?
The spray you're not allowed, there's a different type of spray you can use. It's usually, the better one is just the rigid solution.
Yeah.
It can be done.
Yeah, that doesn't sound too for sure. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay, we'll switch to comments now. John, do you have any comments?
In general, I think you've done a lot of things well in terms of the light industrial functionality, and in particular with the road the way that it is, and a few other details that you've done here. So I actually think it works. It would be great if you could have an option for higher bay doors, but that would kind of mess with your general look of the outside of the building. So, happy to see that multiple bays can be joined as well. That's going to be a key thing. I'm encouraged to see 2 elevators. guys? 2 elevators. Probably less residential units upstairs
Bigger
than
building.
the other building, yeah. Yeah, so that's fantastic. No, I think all my questions are answered, and I think it'll work well the way that it's designed for what it is, together with the residential on top, for light industrial. Looks good.
I would agree with John on that too. I think the overall form of it and the sort of muted tones and the large, very linear overhangs on the residential units combined with the glass railings and a lot of glazing in the residential gives the whole building a lightness that is really, really nice to see for a building this size. The outdoor play space community garden is fantastic too. As a parent, it's actually really good. I think the security of it, of knowing that it's a contained space, there's not dogs running around in there, you know, things less like, well, potentially, but not random stray dogs that are being a problem, leaving messes. Sorry. Oh, the large canopy at the residential residence entries, I think is a really nice feature for really heavily defining where the access is, but also for residents coming and needing to drop off a large amount of stuff in the pouring rain and that and not impeding other people. I think that's a really good feature. The patio area on the south elevation, it will be great to see what goes in there because that's going to be a very appealing thing. And that continuous canopy, that coverage, it's, you know, there's not a lot of spaces like that in Squamish, so that was really well done. Your points about the space in the northwest corner totally ring true. Like I think that makes a ton of sense too. Like now that you speak of it, of not being a child-friendly area or encouraging child uses. And yeah, the fact that there's going to be a significant rental component to that is great to see too. It's finally we're starting to see some nice looking projects that are going to address this problem. So, yeah, it's awesome. Thank you.
Right, so this is a good project, and I think what's interesting about it is that I think it would probably help a lot of the other projects that maybe the applicant that we saw prior that was struggling with, I think, on the building form and how it really integrated. This is a good example of how I think it works in a volumetric way. I'm just speaking specifically as to some of the other applications we saw. And because what it does do is it actually addresses, you know, what this is, and it's been communicated to the architecture that it really talks to what the zone is. And I think that's what I like about it. And then how it was explained and how it was related to the context, I think, was very successful because what you've done is you've thought about pathways, you thought about the entry, you thought about the scale, and not only that, you thought about, okay, well, how you connect your back gardens. I think it's just a very elegant and playful way. And I get a real sense that that's really what this is all about. It's really kind of integration and how it can be diverse. And having the roof deck is always a huge asset, and certainly, you know, something that's very, very enterprising and will be used, and I think certainly should be endorsed. So, I guess the point of the commentary, I think I was just trying to add, is that I think if there's other applications coming forward, that this would be a good example, I think, of what a good representation, what could be done on these sites, because it is so very similar to what we saw prior. The only thing related to context as far as commentary for perhaps improvement would be is maybe get rid of the garbage enclosure out in the corner there, get it into the building, hide it away, and allow the perimeters to sort of really flow together rather than put something that could be smelly adjacent to the back development, perhaps. the other commentary, probably just 3 comments would be that. And I think the entries I think are actually well done. I think they're quite expressive as to how I should enter the building. I would just like to encourage perhaps that the landscape consultant could just take what he's done on other very sensitive parts of the area, either the back and the front, maybe apply the landscape design to the residential entries. I think that would be that, oh, I'm home, I'm different from everything else. I think that could be a real sensitive way of reinforcing the entry. Otherwise, I think they're well handled. The other comment about maybe the architecture is that I think the front street face is very well handled, very tasteful, very sophisticated. But the sides of the building, which will be seen as very linear, they look perhaps a little clumsy. And I think if the front, if you took the design approaches we thought of the front and maybe thought about it on the sides a little bit, it would probably mute the almost random undulation of the overhangs, perhaps. But again, you guys are very talented, and your thought process about the front, I would like to see that probably expressed along the sides of the building or the upper levels. But otherwise, I think it's very well handled, and I think a very good example of future applications.
Can I just interject a comment for planning? Is it possible with something as sensitive as this whole mud sound and a new thing, it would be really handy for things coming forward if there was almost like a model or something set up where it shows like projects that have been green lighted, that have been given the approval whether or not they exist or not yet, that there was like a rendering, that you could actually see the context within which the other, because we don't have anything here to actually specifically reference to those other buildings when we're in the meeting, but it would be very handy, I think, to have that considering the density of everything in that area.
Any certainty yet that's one of those?
For one, there is. I mean, they've submitted their BP. Yeah, but that really, there's just one at this point. But yeah,
but I'm saying that
I
moving
hear what you're
forward,
saying.
like if there's that one and then this one, which is going to be quite large, that would be excellent for seeing that set up so that we can actually have a visual at the actual meetings to see.
I think that can be discussed after the applicant. We can probably do another roundtable and discuss on that. Let's keep the comments to this applicant.
Okay. So my comments, the first one, they found developers don't like to have bikes in the building because of the wear. So just be mindful with your finishes inside. And also just keep in mind like bike handlebars are kind of pretty common to be about 800 mil wide now. So just, I don't know what sizes those interior bike hoppers are, but just something to keep in mind. Yeah, maybe, the second thing, so elevators, I always find like one elevator for 30 units is kind of at the max capacity, so you've got about roughly that same proportion, but I don't think it sort of scales linear either, but there'll be times where it might be a bit pinched, but having the additional access to stairs maybe to go up might help relieve a bit of that in the future. And just on that stair, because the loading bay backs onto the back on the north, I think, just to ensure that something is there to prevent it from blocking the exit.
Like marking on the concrete.
I was thinking like a bollard or something pretty solid. That,
yeah.
Maybe integrated into the architecture a bit nicer than a bollard. But what else? I guess my other concern is just the long length of the building and a way that maybe it could be broken up more. I don't know if that means like, I feel like the front end was addressed well, but the back end was not quite so much, and maybe it's more of a bookend treatment or something may need to occur to help deal with that long length. And the second component for me is just the integration of the residential to the industrial. I think the industrial was done really well. And I think the challenge with this project is always having those two very different uses and how they speak to each other. I'm not going to comment on what suggestions, but just more a general thought of, it's a tough one to sort of bring them together, and maybe you want them to be different as well. So, yeah, and my other concern is just about like similar issues to the spectacle building in regards to like the car parking issue mainly. So just on arrival, as someone who's never been there before, it needs to be really obvious how you deal with the parking situation. And finally, I think that covers it off. Otherwise, it's an interesting project. I'm always concerned with the amount of hardscaping on some of these projects, but I recognise it's like a development of kind of where it came from as well. So, ideally, underground parking would be great, but I get that that's not feasible in some projects. So
water table.
yeah, or if there's definitely like a long length of car parking on the outside perimeter, I think there is, or the inside. Whether there's a way for landscaping to help break that up a little bit more on the interior rather than the outside seems to have the a few spaces missing with planters, not so much on the inside. Thanks.
I think as a general comment, it's good compared to the other projects to see what the FCL relaxation did for this project. You know, it's true. I think the first ones came and didn't try to confront it to begin the project. We had ramps and stairs and real challenges. So I think it's interesting for me to see comments that I thought the panel was going to be challenged with the size and the mass of this that we had on the north projects, but they've kind of gone away because the feasibility of the commercial space is working kind of trumps that. So I think that's a good thing moving forward for all the projects to look at. I think there's a lot in this project. It's a big project, so I commend you. I think there's some really good things there, especially on the public front, the covered bike stand, bike wash, and the connectivity to that bike path. I think it's going to be a really great amenity for the property, especially if it gets replicated or extended. I really like the Pioneer frontage. I think that's much more creative than I had in mind, and it's going to be a great space. It's going to be a good community space, I think, to connect across to like backcountry and those things. I think that you're going to get a trickle effect, so hopefully that does a good anchor tenant. And I really like your honest answer to the interrupted canopies. I think if the intent is not to have people shopping and walking, it's actually a really good way to kind of not discourage it in a bad way, but it is for tenants and more industrial use. It's not trying to be retail, which they're trying to discourage. So I think there's some good value in that maybe. I definitely think the residential entrance could be more residential, would be great. Landscape was a good suggestion to do that. It sounds like you still have some design ideas and development that you need to put into that, but I think scale and materiality could definitely help. I'd love to see you talked about kind of the ability to play with metal and do some more textural ideas to the building. And I think signage is kind of a missed opportunity. It's a great building, and I feel like you do the typical metal or light box sign above the canopy, and I think that loses the creativity that's in the project. I'd love to see you do something a little more specific to the site or stemming from the history of where this is in rail yards of logging, and I think the landscape picked up on that. So that's probably the best landscape we've seen in a while on this scale project, in my opinion. I think there's a really good balance of that. Northeast corner is a great space. Like I would go out lunch there. It was quiet, and my kids were probably riding their bikes all over that into the swamp. So I think it's great and sets a good precedent to connect to. So I really like that. And same with the frontage. I think it's a great space. The timber boardwalks we kind of shy away from, but I think it's a great callback to Squamish and marine culture and such. So I think the only quite big challenge at this point is there's quite a lot of uncertainty of materials. I believe you can solve them and resolve them, but we don't see what is the corrugation, what is the cement panel, what's the texture, what's the shadow, other than colors. And I think that shows up in the elevations and in your discussion. And I think it's quite important. It's not always in your hands as the architect, and sometimes get cut with budget or whatever, so I think that's gonna be my only challenge as we discuss on what to vote is there enough resolution in what the material specs are, and is that what we're gonna see? I'd also be a little nervous. I love all the glass railings and glass, it's great, but you also fill it up with people's things that don't fit in their storage and it could be, you know, not great. So in Squamish, I think they have more things than you want. Is it going to be wood frame above or yeah? So maybe just consider that as a comment or a way of whether it's, I guess it's frosted glass, isn't it? So maybe it looks a little different in the renderings.
No, something happened to our sample there. Or that, sorry, that's the glass canopy.
Oh, okay.
The railings will be clear.
Okay. Something. Oh. For me, no. Otherwise, I mean, materials. Yeah, I think potentially is the right durability and color palette. Could use a little more playfulness, but I think it's a great precedent.
So overall, I think it's quite successful and it's obviously very well considered. I would agree the landscape has a lot of thoughtfulness to the location, particularly the rain garden and the roof amenity. I think that's really strong. In terms of the back landscape, I think it's going to be really popular, and I would encourage even more seating, maybe a big mega bench or something like that. Can never have enough seating. And in terms of the wood, I agree with Chris, it's really nice to bring that back and just encourage you when you're into the details of it. Ensure it's something like a salt treated timber or something that will really work well in winter. In terms of the facade, it's such a big building and it's very repetitive. So if there's an opportunity to consider the materials a bit more and in a way to break up the length of that building would be encouraged. And in terms of the site plan, I find it that the site plan is designed for industrial use, and there happens to be some entrances into the residential. So while I appreciate the canopies aren't continuous from the perspective of how the industrial is being used, the residents are being asked to walk quite a far distance from their parking stall to get to their entry. So I think that in general, the site plan has to have another layer of consideration to how the residential user uses the site. And that goes to includes the canopies, which I think for the residents should be continuous considering the winter months, but also the width of the sidewalk. I think with all the industrial use coming and going and loading and such, 1.5 meters is going to dissolve quite quickly. And while I always hate to lose landscape or this really great recreational pathway in the back, I think the widths of that area should be considered so that we can ensure that that sidewalk is an amenity for all. Imagining during business hours, yet all the residents are coming home too. I think it's going to be really busy and really difficult to navigate that area. So I know it's a tight space, but I encourage you to consider opportunities to increase that width. And then I think it's great that the residential area entry are being informed by the architecture, and I would encourage you to continue to look at those entries and create a really nice warmth and differential architecture to really welcome them home. But overall, I think it's really successful, and thanks for the presentation. Mega bench. Mega bench in every project.
I got that down in my notes.
Oh, I was just going to say one more thing about the roof. I agree. This is a lot of hardscape. It's just inherent to the nature of the programming. But if there's any consideration that could be made, whether it be a green roof or the materiality of it, just to have that other layer of sustainability on that really large roof, it would be great to see what's achievable there. Thanks.
I think I'll start with Sarah's comments. She had to leave early, so some accessibility issues she had is all the some rental units should be accessible. And then the ramp in the front she's going to require that. It's too far around, as you described it, around that recreational path. So did a ramp in the front, curb cuts for the accessible parking stalls. It doesn't show curb cuts. I'm sure you intended it, but where you have a accessible stall, cut the curb so they can get up to the sidewalk. And then in the bathrooms, use pocket doors. Those are a lot easier for accessibility. So those are the 4 comments. My comments would be, I'd really like to see a paved path, that recreational path paved. It just becomes so much more usable for everyone, all weather, all the time.
We did have quite a bit of debate whether we thought it should be paved or gravel, like a permeable surface, and it was just that there's so much impermeable surface on the property that's why we were kind of leaning towards this, but it's always a trade-off.
Yeah.
Appreciate the comment.
Yeah. It's wrong.
Yeah.
Every corridor trail is being paved, and it just feels like it needs to be paved to be useful. I see you have 5% going up to the loading bays, and maybe you could break that and make it flatter to those parking stalls adjacent to the building, and then change the grade a little steeper away from the building so that it's flatter as you drive in or access those stalls. Surprised everyone likes the color. I thought it looked the same as the previous one. It looks gray to me. Maybe some more color, especially in the entranceways. And it does look monotonous along the length, and there was some comments on that, but probably color could change that, or materials. It just looks really gray to me. But I'm not into colors too much. Circulation is great. It looks good. I can get it around the site really well. I think the fire lane is 6, not 6.5, so maybe you have some room there. But I know you've got parking around, and maybe that's the limiting factor. But maybe you have 6 meters in the back where there is no parking there, possibly to get some more room there. And that's my comments. So did you miss anything? Any last comments around the table? No? Okay. So let's vote. We've got 4 options. A, ADP supports the project as presented, does not need to see this project return. ADP supports the project in general and would like the applicant to work with staff to resolve the following recommendations. We can review those recommendations later. C, ADP would like the applicant to resolve the following recommendations and return to present the revised project to ADP. Or D, ADP does not support the project as presented. So, do I have a motion for A, B, C, or D? Motion for B. Okay, any discussion on B? It seemed
I brought up my
very
only kind of
successful.
hinge is that materials are what we're importantly meant to look at.
Yeah.
But
And
can we
other
address that
projects,
with comments too, like that the staff can resolve
Maybe.
that with?
Maybe, but.
other projects we can pretty hard on.
Mm-hmm.
I love the intent, I think it's good, it just seems to be, it's like 25% more design development that's gonna happen, which probably isn't in hand. But,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if everyone's comfortable with it, more so than me, then it's fine. I
Yeah.
can defer.
There's a lot of support around it.
Well, there was quite a few comments around breaking up the massing, using color changes or materiality, and sometimes we don't know to what extent that would be sufficient. And that's probably my only comment. I did hear that from probably half the panel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have a motion for B. Let's vote for B. We're all in favor for B?
Do you want to read the
I'm sorry, was there a seconder for B? I didn't see.
Oh.
Okay.
Dwayne? Do we do it before we vote or after we
I
vote?
think you should do it before you vote, so
Okay.
then you know
What
what's
we're-
being included.
All right.
I can go through what I have unless you want.
I've got a summary.
Yeah, that'd be
I'll
great.
start that.
Yeah.
Okay, so accessibility here, get some accessible stalls in the rental units. Get the ramp in the front for accessibility. Curb cuts at accessible parking stalls and pocket doors in the washrooms. I heard higher bay door options, maybe not all of them, but give some options there. Move the garbage into the building. I don't know where you would put it, but consider moving that. Consider bikes, the width of the bikes in the hallways. The dimension wasn't shown, so consider that. And the finishes, very important. If it's carpet, it's just going to get trashed. So consider the finishes for the bike in and out. Loading bay door separation where that door comes out at the loading bay. Maybe there's some bollard or something that you can actually get out the door if someone's parked at the loading bay. I think there was a call for an additional staircase. Dean,
Or
did you?
just more access into the building, so
Okay.
potentially more than just that main principal residential access.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Break up, this speaks to the building length, break up that length somehow, some way. More specific on the signage and opportunities, maybe Chris, you mentioned that. There's.
Yeah, more so I just thought the one above the canopy, I think they've, something creative they've got with the projecting one, but I don't know sign bylaws all that well, but that could turn it into more of a block mall feel. So I think something more site specific would be great.
There was discussion on railings, if maybe look at frosting or some alternative there that you don't see a bunch of, I don't know, bikes and stuff that you don't want to see.
Or smoked.
Or what?
Or the smoked glass.
Smoke glass.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Smoked or glazed or frosted, okay. Repetitive building, maybe material can change somewhere. Maybe materials change in the residential area and or all the way along. Site plan, there needs to be some consideration for the residential uses. The comment was it's industrial and there's no ability for people to walk along the pathway there or along the frontage. A roof, of course, look at green roof or some opportunity to change it from just a rain catch. What else is out there?
Sarah's accessibility comments.
Yeah, got those.
Yep.
Rich, we had your comments, you didn't say your comments.
I didn't write those down.
Paving the rec trail, the loading stall grade,
Yeah.
more comment on the color. I'll take a look at the drive aisle width.
Okay.
I know 6, yeah, I'm never 100% sure.
Yeah.
Because we have our zoning, well, we have our zoning bylaw, but then we have what fire and building says you actually have to have, so there might be a little bit of room to maneuver that.
Okay.
I have a question. Was Chris alluding to going a different way from B or?
I don't know,
Yeah.
We have to vote.
Well, I'm just thinking of this, what we've done in the past, we were very adamant about materials and content. So the content I think is really good. So in 3D and a complete package is great. We've tried to encourage people to move away from color palettes and more to like what is the corrugated? Is it little? It sounds great for the answers, but it could, this to me seems like it needs, but maybe we're confident enough in it that leaving it with planning is fine. So I don't know if I feel confident saying C because I think it's a great project and you don't want to slow them up and it's a good precedent. So
I feel like the other ones we were sticky on with that had a lot more like bigger picture
agreed.
Things going on that.
Just feeling out here the other people's concerns because in the past it has been a pushback, so maybe that's the reason.
Well, I think all your specifics about that and your comments about that are totally valid, and if those are noted in there too,
Sure.
at least that's something that planning.
Did planning have any concerns about
Sure.
Clarity on all exterior
I
materials?
just have my own personal opinions, which I wouldn't voice. Yeah.
I think it's, breaking it up is a very good point, because it was almost the original, if the original thinking of mud zoning was sort of Ted Townish like look, and now we're 4 buildings in and we've got basically 4 very boat size.
But I think that
buildings.
comes from wanting the density.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is the more commercial density, the more residential you get, so that's.
I get the compromise and the need for one big structure like this, and also the efficiency gains on not having separate buildings, but yeah, breaking it up visually it would create more of that Ted Town feel. It would be nice in the mud zone.
That's mud too. Right? So
But there's
that's
also the
different zone.
affordability
Yeah.
factor too, with the rental component in there too, like I can see it. from
You're
there.
getting a lot of, what I like is you get a lot of things out of this project. So tough to get resolution on everything on such a big project at DP stage,
Yeah.
so personally I'm sensitive to that too. It's a lot to draw and figure out, so.
Well, and the other buildings haven't really given us the Ted Town treatment either, so it's.
No, I don't think the
it's
zone is set up to that. I don't
Yeah.
think you get there
Yeah.
unless you're taking a hit financially. So I think this is giving the district probably a lot of what they want, mixed use, rental housing.
I'll remind that area was upzoned quite a bit
Yep.
for density, so I don't know about taking a hit. It's really
Fair enough.
the correct way.
You know what I mean? It has to be a conscious choice.
Yeah.
Or there's some density.
If we did mud again, we might have some different thoughts. Anyway.
So yeah, no,
Okay.
I would swing to B if
Yeah.
that's what everyone's gonna.
Okay, so we have a motion for B and a seconded, so let's vote.
Sure.
All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Successful project.
Just a
And then a question.
It's over 50,000.
Sorry?
It's not the sell.
Yeah, we should maybe talk about that.
I always just don't like the minimum. I would just not
We
have
always
it.
talk about all jurisdictions to show where signage should go.
You have a motion to terminate?
Yeah,
Oh.
we can,
Right,
yeah, we
we're
can
not
talk
done.
about this a little bit.
They can wait.
Just let you know that there's architecting things going on.
A question
I don't know if
too,
we have
considering
time
all
for
the
the
talk about
grant.
parking
Oh,
and
yeah.
that, has there been any
Okay.
discussion or has anyone brought forward about the possibility of the car sharing company coming into this area? Because this would seem to make a ton of sense, given the use and how central it is that, you know, if somebody was given an incentive to incorporate that into one of these projects,
Yes,
that would
we
be like.
have, to my knowledge, we
win-win.
haven't had any discussion about car sharing in this neighborhood. It's all been downtown waterfront land.
Yes, we're still in meeting. Yeah, they are adjourned, or they are excused.
Thanks.
Thank you.
But further to that, we totally should, I would say the main challenge of the mud one zone is that we totally upzoned it. And so we are dealing with the consequences of kind of like pre-zoned land, and it kind of takes away our ability to negotiate more amenities beyond kind of what is already built into the zone, which is density bonusing. Yeah.
To get the rental
To get
housing, it's the
to get
big
the
push for
affordable.
this neighborhood.
Yeah.
It just seems to, like, I don't know
And
if
it went
it's
from
too late
RS
to
too, it was-
incorporate,
yeah.
because that's like, you know, that's like downtown is a long way away from there, and that whole area is so central to a lot of, you know, and then obviously there's gonna be a lot of people, a lot more people with all the
There's no
developments.
incentive for it though, so it'd have to be voluntary,
Yeah,
okay? Which is possible.
yeah, but that's just was my question essentially, is.
Yeah,
was
like those
there
3
any-
There
extra
could be
stalls
some,
could be.
yeah, and there could be some discussion around their loading variants, and, you know, sometimes we kind of lean on those variances to try to get other
Maybe
things achieved.
to maintain those 3 stalls for that use potentially is a nice thing to hang on to them for, I think.
Yeah.
Car share, van share, something.
Well,
Strata
like,
share.
I would think that it would be like a selling feature to a lot of people too, of like having a car share right there, it would mean like
Just
eliminating your
gotta
car.
force the district to give you a trade-off. parking.
Yeah.
The other thing is that we do now have moto. We have 2 moto cars downtown, and they've come into town, but they are very much steering the agenda of like where they at. Like they're very in control of where the next cars coming down the pipe go. They have, you know, a bunch of formulas that they use.
The rental, like the Airbnb of cars now that just came, gapping on the name.
I haven't heard of it.
I haven't-
Yeah, Jimmy is all about it.
But it's not Uber.
They
It's
have
not
it in San
Uber,
Francisco,
but
where
it's,
you give
but
your car up when you
yeah,
need
so
it.
you can basically rent, so now car share can be public and it's insurable. So it takes, there's the app to do it and the insurance is covered.
Yeah.
So
It's not
that's-
Lyft, right?
No.
No, it's something
Tell it.
totally different.
Yeah, it's what we were waiting to happen for our little one and it's finally happened in Canada.
Are you talking about someone's personal vehicle?
Yeah.
Car share, but I could rent it like Airbnb. Wow. Yeah.
They do it in San Francisco
Yeah.
where they
That's
they use their car,
Yeah.
personal car on the weekend.
Yeah.
And
There's
then
a
during
like
the week, it's just
insurance
out
thing
in the
here for
city.
a while that they got around it. So that's gonna totally
Okay.
change Nini Moto or
Yeah.
Cargo or it's gonna now be peer-to-peer.
Yeah.
Nice.
Amazing.
Yeah.
The other thing about San Francisco is it saved just part of their parking crisis because now they require so many fewer physical vehicles.
Right.
So they have more parking availability. It's
Yeah.
really quite interesting.
Yeah.
We just want to quickly touch on your earlier comment too about trying to show the design and stuff of the surrounding buildings as they come online. I'm really on board with that. I can take that to Jonas
Okay, yeah.
and suggest it. And yeah, I'm not sure if we can have it as a pure requirement, but we can heavily suggest that applicants coming to ADP provide that, and all the drawings are publicly available, so we can access that.
Well, if you stipulated what the file format was that you needed, and it was somebody here that could basically just like drop those into like a master plan, like it doesn't have, we're all savvy enough, it
Sounds
doesn't need to.
dreamy.
No, I know, but it doesn't have to
Somebody
be.
here,
It doesn't have to
Mine
be
play probably.
as, you know, like a
Yeah, we could do- that's
presentation
what I would do,
type
is a
render,
cheater
we
one.
all have
Because
imaginations
most
and
offices
that
won't
goes
give you the
past
3D
it,
model
but
of the building.
in
for
terms of
obvious
seeing the
reasons.
massing and how that works with like daylight in different times and how they're connected and all that, that would be, and the, you know, just the look and form of the materials would be amazing. The other thing about with the pathways being even compacted gravel is like, especially considering the snow that we've gotten in Squamish these last few years too, like that basically would render those pathways useless until the snow melted. Like there isn't an ability to clear them the same way that there is
They
with
might be
the.
okay without it, strata, right? So it's not like it's a right-of-way trail. It's just, that's part of their open space.
Well, the district would secure a public access right of way across
Okay.
that space, so.
And would you
Yeah,
have
but
the
we wouldn't
ability?
take on, the maintenance. Typically is that how it's structured. We get to use it, we don't have to maintain it kind of
Could you
approach.
stipulate the materials that are like?
Yeah, that's still, like,
made out of, so you
very
can-
honestly, we were like all on board of like trying to figure out what would be better. And it was from a permeability standpoint that we're like, yeah, maybe we should leave this as permeable surface. But I
It's so
totally
useful.
understand.
Yeah,
that.
paved.
permeable means
So-
mud and potholes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
And for snow clearing.
Well, and it's not like the valley trail style, it's not like it's that wide.
Either
like
to
it's
drain
not-
it into that little rain garden does more better probably. than-
Yeah.
you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, the benefits of that would be huge too, for kids learning to ride
Yeah.
bikes and
Yeah.
things.
No, we'll shoot for that. on this
Okay,
one.
so
Okay.
we had a round table, got nothing from council, so motion to adjourn. Second. Adjourn.